I remade Half-Life 2, a story-based FPS game, into Doom. Half-Life 2 released over 21 years ago in 2004. This is back when GTA San Andreas released, looking like this. This was the peak graphics back then. But Half-Life 2 still holds up to this day, and while most people try to push Half-Life into the future with mods, RTX support, and maybe even Half-Life 3, I thought, why not push it back in time and remake it like Doom? No, not that Doom, this Doom. Now, to make any game, the first thing you need is a rendering engine. For this game, I have three options. The first one's GZ Doom, which is used for most Doom remakes, but since I'm making Half-Life 2, I need physics, which GZ Doom doesn't have. So then the second option is to use a pre-made game engine, which does all the rendering and physics for me, but isn't faithful to Doom. So I'm just gonna use Unity and try to emulate the original style. And we're ready to start. For this video, I'll be making the first part of Ravenholm, which is the best level in Half-Life. So to start, I'm gonna make the player. For the player's movement, I wrote some code, but since this is a Doom remake, the player shouldn't be allowed to look up and down or jump. So I locked the player's Y-axis and removed the jump function. I also added some extra functionality to allow the player to sprint if he clicks left shift. With the player's movement done, I started to work on some enemies. Now the section of Ravenholm that I'm making has 3 enemies: head crabs, zombies, and poison head crabs. The first enemy I'm gonna make is the zombies. So zombies just follow the player around and attack him whenever he's in range. And after watching a video on enemy AI, the zombies can now follow the player. But if you can't tell, that's not a zombie, that's a square. So I'm gonna have to make some enemy sprites. Doom isn't a 3D game, so these objects aren't 3D models, but sprites that rotate to face the player. And for larger objects like enemies, they change sprites based on the direction the player looks at them, giving them an illusion of actually being 3D. So I have to make 8 sprites for each direction, for each frame for the zombie. This would take way too long if I drew them by hand. So instead, I'll use Blender to render each frame individually and then compress them in Photoshop to get a bunch of sprites that look like this. And after bringing this into the game, I made the sprites rotate to face the player. Now that the zombie can follow the player, I gave it this collider so that whenever the player is in range, the zombie can attack. With the zombies done, I started to work on the head crabs. The head crabs are pretty much the same as the zombies, but instead of just following the enemy to attack, they actually leap towards him to do damage. The only difference between the poison and regular head crab is the damage. The regular head crab does a flat 20 damage to the player whenever it attacks him, but the poison head crab leaves the player with only 1 HP, which then regenerates after a few seconds when the
morphine administered.
And that's pretty much the enemies done. But there's still one big problem. The enemies are always active on pathfinding towards the player the second they spawn, regardless of how far away they are. So I added an activation collider that alerts the enemy to start pathfinding onto the player whenever the player enters it. And when the player doesn't enter the collider, the enemy is not active and it runs in place, just like Doom. Now that the enemies can attack the player, it's only fair if we give the player some weapons to defend himself. At this point in the game, Gordon Freeman has a crowbar, a gravity gun, a pistol, a revolver, an SMG, and some grenades. But Doom has 7 weapon slots. And if you didn't count, that's only 6 weapons. So I also gave the player a shotgun, which he would receive later on in the level just to complete the loadout. And also because the shotgun's like the best weapon in the game. To make the gun shoot, I'll fire a raycast in the direction the player is facing, and if the raycast collides with an enemy, the enemy will take damage. For the SMGs and shotguns, I added raycast deviation to simulate bullet spread. I also added bullet impact particles for the environment and the enemies to allow the player to see whether their shot hit or not. 2 of the weapons I've added have an alt fire, the SMG and the shotgun. The shotgun's alt fire is the double shot, so I just doubled the damage on my gun script and added a new animation, and that's about it. The SMG's alt fire is a grenade, so to make that, I'll first need to make a grenade. For the grenade, I made it kill all enemies within a small radius whenever it hit the surface. I can actually use the same script for my regular grenades, but instead of making it explode whenever it hits the surface, I instead made it explode on a timer. The last weapon that's left is the crowbar, which I made by making it a gun with a short range and unlimited ammo. However, the most iconic part of Doom that still hasn't been added to this project is the status face. The status face has 6 different types of faces for each health level. The first 3 faces change every half a second if nothing's happening within the game. This next face happens if the player takes any damage or shoots for over 5 seconds. Now the shocked face is pretty unique because it's actually bugged and never shows up in the original game. But it's supposed to appear if you take over 20 HP worth of damage. And the last phase happens if you pick up a new weapon. But since there's no weapon pickups in my game, I'll instead make it appear whenever the player picks up a health, shield or ammo pack. I then drew all these faces to match Gordon Freeman, and now the player has evolved from a nameless being into Gordon Freeman. To complete the rest of the UI, I added a health, shield and ammo counter. Now, for these counters to mean something, I need to add some pickups. So I made some health and shield pickups that increase the player's health or shield if they collide with him. I also added 4 different types of ammo packs for each gun. Speaking of ammo packs, I need to add an ammo system to my game. Doom's ammo system's really weird. Unlike Half-Life, Doom does not have a clip, so you can fire your weapons without reloading, except for the shotgun and plasma rifle. So the shotgun reloads every time you shoot, and the plasma rifle reloads whenever you stop shooting. Since this is some unique Doom functionality, I added it to the game by making the shotgun reload between shots and the revolver reload whenever you stop shooting it. Now, that's well and good, but this wouldn't be a Half-Life game if I didn't add the gravity gun. Now, this gun isn't a gun, it's more so a tool you can use to pick up, move, and throw objects. The way I made the gun work is I fire a raycast every time the player left clicks. If the raycast detects an object that can be picked up, it moves that object towards the player's hold position. The way it continues to hold the object is by directly changing its transform to match the player's hold position. And the reason I'm mentioning this small detail is because it becomes very important in the future. Now that the object's been picked up, you can either drop it or throw it. To drop the object, I stop moving it towards the hold position. And to throw it, I do the same, except I apply a force in the direction the player is facing as the object is dropped. Now that the gravity gun can pick up, move and throw objects, it needs some objects to pick up, move and throw. So I'm gonna make all of these props. Functionally, most of these are the same, but there are few that do special things, such as the explosive barrel. If the barrel hits something really fast, or you shoot it one too many times, it explodes and does percentage damage based on how far away the player was from the explosion. It also breaks all props and kills all enemies within its radius. The next prop is the propane canister. This is pretty much the same as an explosive barrel, except it does less damage and sets enemies on fire instead of exploding them. And yes, this means remaking all of these sprites for all 3 enemies. Another special prop is the saw. This is pretty much just a big frisbee that one-shots anything when it's thrown. It also sticks to wooden walls and surfaces if you throw it really fast, but gets deflected off every other type of material. And now for the final prop, the ammo crate. This, like many other wooden props, is destructible. But unlike other wooden props, instead of just exploding, it also drops health, shield and ammo packs to refuel the player on their journey. And speaking of destructible props, these are all the props I made that are destructible, and these are all the ones I made that are not. That's enough about props. Now it's time to make a map to put all of these props in. But first, if you've watched this far, drop a sub to see me make more games like this in the future. Anyways, back to the level. But before we make the level, it's important to know some of the limitations for the Doom engine. Like most levels, Doom's levels have a floor, a ceiling, and some walls. But unlike most games, Doom's levels cannot have a ceiling on top of another ceiling. This removes a lot of verticality from Doom's levels, making them feel flat and linear. And unlike Doom's levels, Ravenholm has a lot of verticality and intertwining paths, so I'll have to take some creative liberties when redesigning this level to match Doom's requirements. After making the model on Blender, I UV mapped some textures onto the planes and then exported that to my game. Then I configured some colliders and baked a new nav mesh for the enemies. And now the level's playable, but I still need to add 3 traps the player must go through to complete the level. The first of which is this propeller that instantly kills any enemies or players that it touches. In Half-Life, you needed to crouch underneath the blades to turn the propeller off. But since you can't crouch in my game, you just need to look at the propeller and click E to turn it on or off. The second trap are these fires that burn any players or enemies that enter it. To turn on these fires, you first need to open the valve and then ignite it by clicking the switch. And to turn it off, you just need to close these valves so that it runs out of fuel. And the third trap is this electric fence. But before I make it, I need to show you how the level's designed. Once you get to the town center, there are 2 paths you can take. The obvious path takes you to an electric fence you cannot cross. So intuitively, the player looks around and stumbles upon the hidden path behind the fire. And after reaching the end of that path, you find a lever that can turn off that same fence from before, allowing you to continue the level. And after adding this trap to the game, the level's done, but it still lacks a lot of details for that indirect storytelling that Half-Life is so famous for. I mean, this looks like a pretty normal looking rustic town. So let's add some headcrab dropships, blood splatters, and dead enemies, just to show the player that this town has been completely destroyed by the Combine. Well, not completely destroyed. There still lives one person, wielding a shotgun and a cross. And he's the most memorable one-off Half-Life character. Yes, I'm talking about Father Grigori. For the part of the game that I'm making, he acts like a storyteller, telling Gordon about the town's history and the traps he's laid out. He also occasionally helps in killing some zombies. So the main thing I need to make is some cutscenes. To do that, I rendered and compressed some of Grigori's poses and then animated them in Unity. And for his audio, I just compressed some of his voice lines to make it sound more retro, I guess. And speaking of audio, the game has none of it. So let's change that. Most of the audio in the game can be split into 4 categories. The player,
Minor lacerations detected.
the enemies, the weapons, and the environment. Also, side note, I made the crowbar play a unique sound every time it hit a different surface for that extra immersion. And the last thing to do is make a quick menu and add some music, for which I used this song, whose name I can't say without getting flagged on YouTube. With all that done, I got some friends to playtest it and give me some constructive criticism. So the bug these guys were facing was not a gravity gun bug, but a frame rate bug. So the default FPS cap I've set for my game is 60, but when I was playtesting, I set my FPS cap to 144. The reason this is important is because of how I move the held objects. Remember when I said that the way it continues to hold the object is by directly changing its transform to match the player's hold position. The way this really works is it changes the object's transform every frame. So if I had 2 computers doing the same movement at different frame rates, the gravity gun would have 2 different results. So instead of a transform, I'll instead use a rigid body by applying a force to the object to make it move towards the held position. And now it's consistent on all frame rates. And as an added bonus, it now works more like the original gravity gun than the previous version. Now to finish off the project, I fixed some other bugs, and I think we're finally
Cleverly done, Mr. Freeman, but you're not supposed to be here. As a matter of fact, get back where you belong and forget about all this. Until we meet again.
I don't know what that was about, but if you want to know what that was about, the game's free on itch.io right now. I mean, you've watched the entire devlog, might as well play the game, right? Anyways, that's all for today. Like if you like, dislike if you don't, and goodbye. Also, Valve, please don't sue me.